Hey everybody, I'm Mark Walters with BigFanboy.com. I'm here at the Dallas International Film Festival on the final day of interviews, and this is definitely the most exciting for me. His films range from anything from perennial classics such as The French Connection and The Exorcist to cult favorites such as To Live and Die in LA, and most recently Killer Joe. It is a great honor, one of the great honors of my life, to be able to interview Mr. William Friedkin.
Thank you very much,
Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Great to have you in Dallas. You're going to be receiving the Star Award, and we couldn't be happier about that.
This doesn't look like Dallas in here. It's a dark room with black drapes.
The skyline's got drapes over it.
Maybe there's a storm coming.
I'm assuming you've probably been through here multiple times before. I know you've come through for some other type of festival type stuff.
Oh, I was here many years ago. As a matter of fact, I covered a trial in Houston for the Dallas Morning News. It was a very famous murder trial that had morphed into a civil trial of a very famous murder case in Houston. And in order to get accredited to attend it in this little courtroom in Houston, I got the Dallas Morning News to let me cover it. And so I had journalist credentials and wrote a couple of front page stories about it.
That's amazing, really. When was this?
Back in the late 70s.
Okay. Wow. So like right after the time, I guess, Sorcerer had come out, or right before that?
It was after. It was after that, and this was, I don't know if the viewers or listeners will be familiar with this, but it was the Ash Robinson case, and it was written up as in a wonderful nonfiction book by Tommy Thompson called Blood and Money.
Okay. And
Racehorse Haynes, who must be a familiar name around here, the lawyer, he was one of the lawyers in the case.
Interesting. Wow. See, I didn't know. We never knew.
Well, you're too young to know that.
I guess so.
But you're not too young to read books, Mike. So
I'm not.
So you can read Blood and Money.
I can, and I will after this is over.
Great. Yeah. Great.
I want to go back to the beginning. One of the very first things that you did professionally was 1965, the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. You being a guy coming out of, obviously being aspiring, doing documentary films and things like that, and then coming in and working with a guy like Hitchcock, and of course that very famous story about him giving you a hard time about no tie, and I can totally relate because I hate wearing ties. Mm-hmm. So, but working with a guy like that, like right out of the gate, what was the sense going through what's going through your head at that moment?
Well, obviously, this was the 9th or 10th year of the Hitchcock Hour. It was, in fact, it was supposedly the last show. They were going off the air after 10 years, and I was doing the last episode of the last show. And so I didn't really work with Hitchcock. He would come in once a week and read his introductions off what we call an idiot card, which means they were written on a large white card next to the camera. And he'd come in once a week and read 5 of these. Yeah. And I met him. I said hello to him. And then the only other thing he did relating to the show in that time was he would look at all the cuts that the directors would do, and he would have final cut. He would make any changes. And I'm told that he didn't make any changes in the cut that I did. I wish he had, but they were shot pretty tight, and it was a finely oiled machine. And I came in as a very young man, and I had a lot of ideas on how I was going to revolutionize the show, but it was so well organized that basically it was a struggle for me to keep up, because I had never done anything on a soundstage then. Mm-hmm.
And then going from that, you wanted to work with Harold Pinter, and so you did The Birthday Party in 1968, mm-hmm. Which is, I guess in some ways was kind of the beginning of you working with playwrights, because you had done several other films with playwrights, but that was kind of a personal thing for you, right? Being able to work with Pinter on that?
Well, Pinter is one of the great playwrights of the 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and it was an education for me. I learned more about drama from working with Pinter for a year than anyone at any other time.
Yeah. 1971, The French Connection comes out, and this is sort of before the days of like big Hollywood blockbusters. But this thing really kind of just it really kind of solidified, I guess, like the cop drama crime film. And I think in a lot of ways kind of changed the way people look at chases in movies and things like that. When you were making that thing, again, there's always that pedestrian question of, did you have any idea that it was going to end up being as popular as it was? But
you're not going to ask me.
I'm not going to ask you that
pedestrian question.
I'm not. But I have to wonder, like in the scenes when you're editing the chases, like did you realize in that moment, like, there's something special about this? Yeah.
No. When you film a chase scene as a director, well, I also conceived the scene. You do it one shot at a time. It's like knitting. I don't know if you or any of your viewers or listeners have ever done any knitting, but shooting a chase scene is like knitting. It's one shot at a time. Knit one, purl two. Knit one, purl two. You have to keep the whole pattern in your head. You know, you have to be aware of what the sequence, or in the case of knitting, the sweater, is going to look like while you're doing it one stitch at a time. So I had the whole thing in my mind's eye before I shot it. Then a lot of things went wrong. A lot of the stunts that I had set up didn't work, and I had to adjust to that. And all those adjustments are in the sequence. Now, I will tell you that I have since I made The French Connection, I was able to see the Buster Keaton chase scenes from the silent era. If I had seen those before, I never would have undertaken a chase scene because they can't be topped.
Yeah.
They were incredible. And of course, like the ones that I've done, you had to do all that stuff. There was no computer-generated imagery. Everything you see, we had to do. But so did Keaton. And the stuff that he did, there are about 7 or 8 that I know of, great silent chases that put away anything I've seen since, including my own work.
Yeah, we're finally getting to see a lot of that stuff now.
Yeah.
Kino's putting out a lot of the old Keaton stuff, which
because
is great.
Of
yeah.
Blu-ray and DVD. Yeah. But we weren't able to see that. There was no Blu-ray or DVD when I was younger.
Well, but I think that's what's so amazing to me is when I watch those sequences and knowing that you didn't know how it was all going to come out until you put it all together and you stitched it together. And so it really was a matter of having it in your head and knowing exactly how it was going to play out. I'm just extremely impressed that you could put that together.
Well, the other thing is the soundtrack, which was all done separately. I used sounds that I went out after I shot the sequence visually. We went out and made specific sounds for everything. The individual sounds of the car, you know, at various speeds, in various gears. We made the sounds of the elevated train from various perspectives, the sounds of people in the street, Hackman's voice. Everything was done separately, and in order to make a sequence that works, as that one did, you have to have the whole thing in your mind's eye before you do it. At the same time, there's a lot of things going on when you're shooting in a street that you don't have complete control over.
Sure.
And so you have to be ready to take advantage of happy accidents. There are happy accidents, and then there's unhappy accidents if someone gets hurt.
Right.
And knock wood, thank God, nobody even got a twisted ankle.
Again, amazing.
It is, because it was very dangerous, for real.
All right, so 1973, The Exorcist comes out.
That's it on The French Connection?
Well, I want to keep going because I want to.
Greatest film?
It is one of the greatest films
That's
ever made.
it?
But I've got so many more films I want to get to
Okay.
here, so we can come back to The French
that's
Connection.
fine.
Actually, that was the first time you worked with Roy Scheider, and then you guys would work together again on Sorcerer. Was he one of? Because I noticed you don't work with a lot of the same actors again. Was he one of those actors that, like, when you worked with him, that you wanted to say, like, I got to bring this guy back and do more stuff with him?
It's all about the role.
Yeah.
I try not to do the same picture every time,
Right.
so you need different actors. Then sometimes an actor you work with in, say, 1971 isn't exactly right for a similar role in 1984.
Exactly.
Or something. But I did work with Roy twice,
Yeah.
and I had never seen him on stage. He made a film that had not come out yet called Clute when I met him.
Yeah.
And he came into my office and sat down, and he had a script that they handed him outside my office, and he sat down and I said, hi, and I said, what are you doing, Roy? He said, well, I'm in an off-Broadway play by Jean Genet. I said, well, what kind of role do you play in that? And he said, a cigar-smoking nun. I said, okay. I said, you're hired. And that was it.
Simple.
That was it. I cast him on the way he looked and the way he sounded and his attitude and my perception of his intelligence. Yeah. And that's pretty much how I've cast everybody. I don't audition actors. I don't have them read. It's a waste of time. In the French Connection, most of the scenes had to be completely improvised. So you needed somebody who was the character, not someone who would have to put on makeup or become younger or older. And I always go on instinct with casting, even though it's the most important aspect of making a film after the script. After you say, well, I'm going to do this script, the casting is about 80% of the rest of the film. If it's cast wrong, it will never work, no matter how well it's made.
That's one of the things I've always admired about your films is your choices on people, because you do take some bold and different choices than I think a lot of directors would have had they been shooting that same movie. All right, so we can come back to the French Connection, but I do want to let's go to The Exorcist, which is 1973. Now I know that I remember hearing the stories about how Blatty approached you and appreciated you for your honesty in terms of saying if a script didn't work and what did and did not work and everything. When this film was made, again, there's that pedestrian question of did you have any idea that this was going to be the big film?
But you're not going to ask.
I'm not going to ask that pedestrian
either.
question, but
I know you won't.
I would say that when you're shooting a film like The Exorcist, that you have to know that this is such a different and unique thing, especially at that time. We hadn't really seen films like that at that time that really had those kinds of bold choices and psychologically deep-rooted as it was.
Did you think this interview was going to work before you did it?
I never know if an interview is going to work.
You don't know. There's your answer.
Yeah.
You don't know. I mean, I could be some stiff who would have no answer to anything.
Right.
Or wander off into right field or something like that.
So far, you're doing pretty great.
No, but you never know, Mike. You just don't know.
Yeah.
I knew that the material was powerful and disturbing and was based on an actual case that took place in 1949 in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I never thought of it in terms of a horror film. I thought of it in terms of a story about the mystery of faith. And that's how I went ahead and did it. I never thought, how can I make this more scary or more horrible? The stuff that happened in the original case was disturbing enough. And what Blatty did was change the character from, it was a 14-year-old boy in 1949 to a 12-year-old girl, because the Jesuit diocese in Georgetown, where he was going to school, asked him to disguise the gender as well as the identity of the young man. Now that young man is still alive, recently retired, and he has no memory of what happened to him when he was 14 years old. Wow. And there's, in my book, which is coming out in a few days, my memoir, I describe that whole case and how the family was not Catholic, they were Lutheran. The Lutheran Church had nothing like exorcism. And so everything was tried on this young man in terms of what was modern science and medicine and psychiatry in those days to determine a cure for these weird, occurrences, the manifestations that occurred to him when he was 14, and nothing worked. And so the Catholic Church did an investigation at the request of his parents and determined that an exorcism was called for. Now, as far as we know, there were only 3 cases in the United States in the 20th century in the Catholic Church where an exorcism was called for, where the victim was actually thought to be a victim of demonic possession. Only 3. So it's not like priests go out and do this, 2 or 3 of them before breakfast every day.
Which a lot of movies since then would have you believe.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of the movies about the subject since then.
Yeah, you're missing nothing.
No, but the thing is, it was a profound mystery, and that's what attracted me. Maybe someday medical science will determine a cause for these incredible symptoms that the boy possessed and that seemed to be inflicted upon him.
Yeah. Well, I think there also has to be a certain degree of when people watch that film, particularly parents, the concept of, what if that was my little girl? And what if I was going through the same thing? Mm-hmm. How would I react and how would I deal with it? And I think to me that's even more horrifying. Well,
the story does get to the idea that we all are interested in, whether you're Catholic, which I don't happen to be, or any other religion, or if you call yourself an agnostic or an atheist. We're all interested in why bad things happen to good people. Mm-hmm. And on the rarest of occasions, it's something like that.
Yeah. It's amazing how well that film holds up today. Well, I shouldn't say that because you made it. Of course it holds up today.
Why shouldn't you say that?
Well, because, I mean, you make...
What if I hadn't made it?
You make very endearing films. You make films that have that longevity.
Like Cruising, yes. Very endearing.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that.
No, but I mean...
Before we get to that,
endearing is not how I would describe my films. I appreciate it. You're talking about Vincent Minnelli, who did... Singing in the Rain. No, American in Paris.
Yeah. Well, effective.
No,
I would say it's still effective to this day. I think that's one of the things. You can show it to people and it's frightening, and it holds up. Is what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate it.
In 1977, The Sorcerer comes out, and this is another one of those films that I know you personally have been involved in trying to give us the definitive version of the film that so many people haven't seen yet. And this is one of those movies that very sort of unusual, but at the same time, I think is kind of a lost classic. I consider it to be like a lost classic.
It's not lost. It's coming out again this year.
Yeah.
There was a very complicated legal entanglement. The 2 studios that made it were bought and sold on several occasions. And all of the papers, all the legal papers, tend to disappear. They go underground. Yeah. The new management that comes into a studio, you can imagine the millions of legal documents pertaining to every film or television program that a studio does. And after a certain period, they either burn these documents or they go underground. And so all of the ownership rights to Sorcerer had disappeared from the view of the new young lawyers that came in to Paramount and Universal, and we finally seem to have unwound the trail. So the film I'm going to remaster the film this year, God willing, and bring it out again as in a high def format in theaters and on home video.
Yeah. I did want to ask you, because I had remembered talking to some friends of mine in the UK were saying that for some reason when they would show that film on UK television, the ending, which is a very sort of Twilight Zone-esque type ending, that for some reason it cuts and it just goes right to the credits. Do you know anything about? Was there some reason that they cropped it for some reason?
I don't. This is the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, it may have just been
Let me tell you that
a bad cut or something.
On all of my films, people have written to me either via the social network or letters, whatever, saying, when I saw the film, it didn't have this, or it had a scene that I didn't see before. In a lot of cases, it's in someone's head.
Right.
So I can't verify that.
Yeah.
Or very often a film could get cut off because they forgot the last reel, or they sold commercial time so I'm not even aware of anything like that. But once you make a film and send it out there, various things can happen that go wrong. I know of no exceptional cut of the film.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that maybe it was for some reason the particular network that had it maybe had cut it improperly and just didn't.
They will never. I mean, especially in Great Britain, that doesn't tend to happen. The BBC and even the commercial channels in England and France are very careful about the films that they buy. They don't muck about with them.
Yeah. All right, cruising. Let's get into that. 1980. Again, kind of like...
It's very endearing, don't you think?
It's a very endearing film. Controversial subject matter, obviously, at the time, but I always feel like whenever people ask me and they say, like, where do you think Al Pacino became kind of the Al Pacino? And a lot of people will bring up things like Dog Day Afternoon or the Godfather movies or whatever. To me, I felt like Cruising was kind of a definite turning point in his career to show what he could do and the different directions that he could go in terms of his acting ability, because it was a very daring film and it was a film that had a lot of people talking. When you made that, was there any sort of opposition at the time when you were making it? What kind of opposition did you come up against?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the film was set in the S&M world, the leather bars that were underground in New York City at the time, on the cusp of the AIDS epidemic, which didn't have a name at the time we made it. But a lot of people were dying mysteriously. A lot of people connected with the film. Most of the people connected with that film who were either in the film or worked on the film, like the art director and others, died of AIDS not long afterward. And it was at that time, and I imagine to some extent, although there are treatments, in fact cures now for AIDS, at that time it was a great mystery. At the same time, there were these mysterious murders in the S&M bars, and that was the subject of Cruising. A New York detective who is sent into the bars to try and trap a killer because he resembled the victims. And a guy who actually did that is a close friend of mine. He was the detective who did that. His name is Randy Jurgensen. Mm-hmm. And I mostly took his story and his account of things, but then I went into the bars, and it wasn't easy. The bars were owned by the mafia at that time in New York. Okay. And I had a lot of friends in the mafia. They would still be my friends, but they've died out. And of natural causes, by the way. But
you outlasted the mafia.
Well, some of them. I mean, the guy who owned the mine shaft where we shot most of Cruising was a guy called Matty Ianello, who was head of the Genovese family. And they owned, or they were paid for protection on almost every business on the west side of New York at the time. And I knew him. He's a very interesting and nice guy. And I used to go and have breakfast with him at his house, and one day I asked him if I could shoot. I had a film idea that I wanted to do at the mine shaft, which I'd never seen. And while I'm talking to him in his kitchen over breakfast about this, quite openly, he went like this, shh, shh. And he said, "So how you doing, kid? How's everything going? You working on another film?" He changed the subject completely. And then after about 20 minutes or so, he said, "Come on, I'll walk you out to your car." And we went outside of his beautiful house, and he walked me in the opposite direction from my car. And he said, "Don't turn around." He said, "There are two guys in a unmarked car back there. They're watching us.
Listening in.
One of them is a lip reader. They got my house bugged." He said, "You cannot talk about my business in my house."
Wow.
And he said, "Now what do you want?" And I told him, and he gave me a name. He said, "Here's a guy's name. Here's his phone number. Don't write it down. Just remember it. And call him and tell him I told you to call." And so I did. And it was a long process that got me access to the mine shaft, which was a private club, to shoot with the people who I came to know who were members of the club. It was tougher to get in and film there than it was for me to get to Iraq, where I filmed for 3 months the opening of The Exorcist, which was in Mosul, Iraq, in the northern part of Iraq, right next to Turkey. It was Kurdish country. And the Kurds did not, they had a very uneasy peace with the Baathists, the Arabs who ran Iraq then. But it was easier to get to film there, where the United States had no diplomatic presence at all in those days, than it was to get into the mine shaft.
It's amazing. It sounds like that's a movie in and of itself, right?
Well,
there.
the mine shaft, well, the film, though, I'm happy to say, is very endearing.
Yeah.
And
you're using my word again.
And I'm sure that a lot of young people ought not to see it to this day.
Well, and it is one of those films that, if you had made that film 10 years later, it probably would have been a little bit maybe not as controversial, but maybe a little, yeah.
You couldn't make it at all.
Yeah.
You can't make it today.
Right.
We made it in 1979 for 1980. You couldn't make it 10 years ago, possibly not even 10 years from now.
Yeah.
It's, the subject matter and the violence and the ideas behind it were and are politically incorrect. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of that, but I'm not interested in political correctness.
Yeah.
I think that's...
You want to tell stories.
Yeah, and a lot of the stories are going to offend somebody. I'm more offended by sitcoms on television. I think they're what's at the heart of what's wrong with the country. The false image of the American family that's put out every night on sitcoms.
Well, and they're so lazy now. It's like they don't even put any effort into the writing or anything.
They have laugh tracks, that tell an audience that's in the studio when to laugh. Or if they don't have a studio audience, they have artificial canned laughter. And the stuff just isn't funny. Yeah. I mean, I've tried to watch most of these things. I can't. Yeah. But obviously millions can, and great.
You're smarter than that.
Well, not at all, but just not to my taste,
All right, now we're getting to one of my favorites, 1985, To Live and Die in L.A. This is, I love this film. Absolutely love this film.
You find it endearing?
I find it very endearing,
good.
Bill.
Okay.
But one of the reasons that I love it, which of course is one of the big reasons to love it, is because there's just this very, very shocking moment that happens in the film where your protagonist, your main character, all of a sudden, spoilers if you haven't seen the film, you should see the film.
Spoiler alert.
But this is a spoiler alert. But William Peterson dies, and dies in a way that he's not coming back. There's no way, there's no sequel with William Peterson in it. He's dead, he's gone.
What's the name of the film?
What's the name of the sequel?
No, what's the name of the film you're talking about?
To Live and Die in L.A.
That's why he dies.
There you go.
He lives and dies.
He lives and dies in
L.A.
Well, now when you made that decision to do that, because even at that time, I guess sequels hadn't quite really kicked in, but Hollywood had to have, they were thinking about movies as possible sequel films. This was obviously a situation where you couldn't really do that unless you went with the buddy character, and So did you meet opposition on that? Did they say you can't do this? You can't kill your main character, or what was?
I don't care what they say, Mike. You seem to indicate that I would listen to somebody saying you can't do that.
Yeah.
If it's somebody, let's say Orson Welles or Alfred Hitchcock or somebody who knows a great deal more than I did, I would listen to them.
Right.
But most of those guys don't know
Just suits. They don't,
what they're talking about. But yet you're absolutely right. Yeah. The people who produced the film would have much preferred there was a sequel. Now, right now, I'm in conversations with the studio, the new management of the studio. They would like to do a television show, series on To Live and Die in L.A. But it would have to be quite a bit different and not with the same characters. But it's still a very strong title, and it still does very well. It has a very good afterlife. But at the time, when I made the decision to have the main guy played by Bill Peterson, it was his first film, to have him killed, it was thinking about the film and realizing the film was about the thin line between the policeman and the criminal, and the idea that those who live by the gun will eventually die by the gun, no matter from what walk of life they emerge. These guys happen to be Secret Service agents, and then the guys on the other side were counterfeiters in that picture. But it was a violent world. And there is, contrary to what you see in a lot of cop action films, there's a lot of death. A lot of these cops, every time a cop gets up in the morning, puts on a gun and a badge, he knows he may not come home. Yeah. And I knew a lot of cops and all over the world, and I understood that fear and the adrenaline that kicks in when they go out on the job. They may not come back. And it occurred to me that that's what's going to happen to this guy. He's too much of a hot dog. Now, that wasn't in the original script. One day I went to Bill Peterson. I said, in a couple of weeks, your character's going to die. He said, really? How? And I told him. He said, cool. He said, that's great.
Finding a guy like that, because again, this goes back to what we were talking about finding the right actor for the part, because he was very unproven at the time, and so
he had never made a film.
You saw something in him, and you knew this is the right guy for this part, and I think you were very forward thinking in that way too, because I think he's a terrific actor, and I think especially in that role, I can't imagine anybody else playing that character.
Well, thanks, Mike. I wanted basically unknown actors in that film. I didn't want stars. I wanted a kind of verisimilitude, a kind of actuality feel to it. And my casting director said, you got to come up to Toronto, to the Shakespeare Festival, to see this guy who's acting in a Streetcar Named Desire, Bill Peterson. And I said, I don't want to go up to Toronto, and I don't want to see Streetcar Named Desire. Marlon Brando played that part, and he owns it. Right. Everybody who's done the part since just imitates Brando. So I don't want to. He said, no, you got to come up and see this guy. So I trusted my casting director, and I went up there. Peterson was terrific. His portrayal was unique, very original. I met with him afterwards, and I hired him. He had never made a film. He was a stage actor living in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Again, really love the film. I did want to ask you about in 1987 Rampage, because I'm actually friends with Michael Biehn and his wife Jen, and that's a film that again is kind of one of these. It is sort of lost, and
no, it's just come out on Blu-ray.
It's finally out on Blu-ray, but a lot of
people
are
talking. There's no such thing as a lost film.
Yeah, it's just the studio letting it.
No. When I tell you that everybody watching this or listening to this can go out and watch a Buster Keaton film made in 1909 or 1911 or whatever. Those films were lost for maybe 60 or 80 years.
Yeah.
With the new technology, the great saving grace of the new technology, not only is it a better system to view something, but it has been the real repository, the real cinematheque of world cinema. Nothing is lost. B pictures that had a shelf life in the 1950s of about 2 or 3 weeks are coming back and are being seen all over the world in people's homes, and actually in revival theaters and places like that. So Rampage is coming out again, and it's constantly being written about, reevaluated. You know, one of the problems that I perceive from film historians, film buffs, and film critics is that they tend to really only think about what's going on today, the present. But film, like music and painting, has a long legacy. And whereas there are museums for paintings, and there are symphony orchestras all over the world, or bands that will revive music that was written centuries ago, up until recently that didn't exist for cinema. But cinema is also a young art form. It's probably the youngest, one of the youngest art forms. It's constantly changing and shifting. I don't even think it could be called cinema anymore. You're going to have to take this logo down, which shows a reel of 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore. We don't make 35 film anymore. Eastman Kodak is out of business. Technicolor now makes digital prints, not 35 millimeter. Mm-hmm. So the technology is shifting, but the idea of the storytelling is still there with different cameras, no film in the camera at all, just maybe a chip. You know, not anything you can hold in your hand is right around the corner. In a few years, people won't be buying Blu-rays or DVDs. They'll be streaming these stories, whatever they're called. There needs to be a new term for them because they're not films anymore.
Yeah.
But they do live. You know, they do live. Vermeer, who was one of the greatest artists of the 17th century, he lived in a little town outside of Amsterdam called Delft. D-E-L-F-T. He ran an inn, he and his wife. They had 11 children. His wife was Catholic. He was a Calvinist. But they had 11 children. He painted in the room upstairs. He died broke in the 17th century. He was broke. He didn't sell, to, as far as we know, any of his paintings. His wife was out in the streets selling his canvases for a few guilders when he died.
Wow.
And today, the 37 surviving Vermeers are priceless. You can't buy a Vermeer for $100 million. Some of them, there is no price. The View of Delft, which is in the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, it can't be bought. So it's great art, and it has survived. You can see it in museums.
Yeah. Well,
there are 2 Vermeers now on special loan to museums in Los Angeles and San Francisco. One of them is The Girl with the Pearl Earring, which is a painting by Vermeer that was made into a film a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
The actual painting is at the San Francisco, at the De Young Museum now as we speak, and there are lines around the block to see a painting that was done in the 17th century that no one had any idea existed. So when you're talking about an art form, you're talking potentially about timelessness.
Well, and it's great too that there's a lot of studios now that are even going so far as to do a print-on-demand sort of thing for. There are certain titles that you couldn't get up until just like a year or so ago, that now that they are making them available, even if it is just on a by-demand basis, to where you can purchase that film specific to order. But I did want to ask about Rampage because that was very early in Michael Biehn's career, and he was not. I guess he wasn't quite a household name. He had done Terminator at that point, but that was a film that it seemed like. I know there were some distribution issues where it was released over in the UK first, or...
Yes, well, the company that financed it, the De Laurentiis Corporation, actually went bankrupt right in the middle of the release of the film, and it was taken over several years later. It was bought out of bankruptcy by the Weinstein Company, and they put it out some 5 or maybe even 5 years after we had made it. They had been after it for years, and the De Laurentiis Corporation, it was tied up in that paper chain again that happens when a company goes bankrupt.
Yeah. And that was, you wrote that one as well, right? Yeah, that was one of the, because you've written about 5 of your films. If
I'm not sure how many, Mike, but I did a lot of writing on a lot of my films.
Yeah. I have to correct you. My name is Mark.
Mark.
That's okay.
Why have I been calling you Mike all this time?
It's been fun.
Well, I tell you, I thought you said, I really apologize.
No, it's okay. You've probably met 100 people today alone, I would imagine.
Not named Mark.
Well, you never know.
No, but I find you very endearing.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And,
that's very nice of you.
Never, under any name. Okay. A rose is a rose under any name. A Mark is a Mark and not a Mike.
That's right. That's true.
Everyone, after me now. A Mark is a Mark and not a Mike.
Thank you very much.
My error.
It's okay. It's okay.
I better adjust my hearing aid.
All right, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. Another film of yours that I really love that I'm constantly trying to introduce people to it if they haven't seen it is The Hunted, because I love the sort of the raw brutality that film has, especially with the knife fights and things like that. And there's so much attention to detail in that film. It's a great sort of character piece as well with Tommy Lee and Benicio. Really enjoy that film a lot. When you were making that particular project, what was the thing that was the impetus of that film? Was it always just supposed to be about sort of the psyche of a cold person and how they would go up against someone that also was kind of cold and emotionless? I mean, I don't know what I'm getting at here. I just love the movie.
No, it was supposed to be a love story.
It was supposed to be a love story.
About two young teenagers, and I miscast it. Instead of casting a woman opposite Tommy Lee Jones, I cast Benicio del Toro. Of course it was always supposed to be. It's about an actual guy who is called a tracker, and he has a tracking school in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. His name is Tom Brown. And he's written about 20-odd books. He was also an advisor to the military on survival techniques and killing techniques, but he had never killed anyone himself. But he trained young soldiers in the art of survival, camouflage, and killing. And I always thought it was interesting that he was an expert in all of these things, but had never done it himself. And the story intrigued me, the idea of this classical survivalist and knife fighter whose star pupil went off the rails during the Bosnian War, the Bosnian-Serbian War, and came home with post-traumatic stress syndrome and started killing at people at random out in the forest. It's not unlike this case that took place recently in Los Angeles that you may have read about, the Christopher Dorner case. Mm-hmm. He was an African-American cop who was kicked off the force and then went out killing cops and threatening cops by name. and he held the city of Los Angeles from San Diego to Big Bear to the heart of Los Angeles. He held the city at bay for 10 days. And this happened just a few weeks ago, probably a month or so ago. And it was very similar to the fictionalized version of The Hunted. What I found fascinating was the teacher having to now go out and hunt down the pupil.
Right.
Because conventional crime-solving methods weren't going to bring this guy in The Hunted. And I had also a couple of expert Cali knife fighters, which is a Philippine style of knife fighting.
Yeah.
I had 2 guys on the set who were skilled at that and trained the actors how to do it. So we used a form of knife fighting that had not, close-range knife fighting that had not been seen before.
Right.
And that film is done very, very well. And
I love it.
It's still available at all times, and I'm pretty proud of it as well.
Well, and it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with the French Connection and stitching together a scene. Like when you're shooting those knife fights, I would imagine that that's a pretty complex. I mean, just those by themselves, that's got to be as complex as shooting a chase scene.
Well, but like a chase scene, there's a lot of choreography that goes on before you film it. And the choreography is done in slow motion, and then a little faster, and a little faster, and a little faster, until the actors become skilled enough to perform it at close range. Obviously, not all of the scenes at very close range are done with an actual sharp knife.
Sure.
But that is the only film I've made where an actor actually got seriously hurt. And it was during a relatively easy moment to film. It was a moment when there's only one knife between them, and it's on the ground, and they both dive for it at the same time. And they dive onto what was a literal bed of grass and soft earth. And the knife was there, and one guy's here, and the other guy's about 10 feet away. They both dive at the same time. They had practiced this 100 times. And when we went to make the shot, Benicio fell incorrectly. Instead of falling on his hands, he fell on one hand and his wrist.
Oh, my God.
And he broke his wrist.
Oh, man.
And we had to stop shooting at that point for 6 months while his wrist healed. And 6 months later, we came back and finished the scene, and there's no one who sees that film can tell the point at which that happened.
That's some good knitting.
There were about 5 or 6 shots left to do, and they were filmed 6 months apart. But that was the only film I've ever made where anyone even got a sprain. He actually broke his wrist.
Wow, that's amazing. I did want to mention, at least quickly, I wanted to mention Bug, because again, going back to finding the right actors for the right roles, you had the forethought of looking at a guy like Michael Shannon, who now is kind of becoming he's a very big actor now. He's
about 6'6".
He's about 6'6", yeah. But I think in the last couple of years, people are really starting to take notice of him. But you kind of found this guy when nobody knew who he was, and he just...
Oh, his aunt and uncle knew him.
Well, of course.
I think
his parents, maybe.
I think his father might have been aware of him, but I'm not sure. He's a wonderful actor, and that's now been discovered. I mean, Michael is not a movie star, but he's a really fine actor.
Yes.
And he was when I saw him. And I felt that he would have a really good career. But I'm interested more in an actor than a star, and an actor or actress who is right for the part. If this guy over here is a big star, but he's not right for the role, I have no interest in using him in that role.
Right.
And Shannon, had very small parts in other films and TV shows, but I gave him basically the lead in Bug.
Yeah.
And now he's gone on to a lot of leads and a very solid career.
And then you worked again with Tracy Letts on Killer Joe, which I think is terrific. And that I
think that's why I'm in Dallas, getting a Life Achievement Award because of the great image that I created for Dallas in Killer Joe.
With the hot dog, yeah. Or the chicken, I'm sorry, with the chicken. But the thing I love about Killer Joe, what was I thinking of? Hot dog.
Yeah.
I had a hot dog.
Mike, you got to, what?
I had a hot dog for lunch.
They're dangerous.
So they are dangerous. They're nasty, horrible things. But
they're delicious, though.
They are.
I wish I had one now. Any of you guys have a hot dog?
God.
There's a commercial.
Mr.
Have you
Friedkin,
seen it?
can we get
with Charles Barkley and Alec Baldwin sitting at the stands at a basketball game, and a guy comes around with a case of hot dogs, and Barkley takes two and puts one in his jacket, and Baldwin says, "Why did you put that in your jacket?" He said, "Because it's like a natural warmer there," and Baldwin starts to eat his, and then he says, "By the way, do you have any mustard in there?" And Barkley reaches in and hands him a jar of mustard. That pertains to your question, doesn't it? No, I love hot dogs. Hot dogs put me in the hospital for months. I had a heart attack. I have a pacemaker now, seriously.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll try not to get you too excited.
Well, when you say hot dog, I start to go crazy.
It's too late now. Yeah, I've already done it.
You know, I think more people have been killed by hot dogs than in
plane crashes or something
conflict.
Like that. Yeah. Probably so. Well, you know, the interesting, Killer Joe, I got to interview pretty much everybody that was involved with Killer Joe, all the actors, and I talked to Tracy, and the only person that wasn't there was you. So where were you hiding?
I was, you might have heard my voice. It was. Did you go to the
this was
South by Southwest
yeah.
in Austin? Mm-hmm. I was actually in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, working for the Theater an der Wien. Wien is the actual German name of Vienna, W-I-E-N, pronounced Wien, and I was directing the opera, The Tales of Hoffmann. But they had a video camera there, and I taped, I did an on-camera tape for the South by Southwest, where I sort of introduced the actors who were on stage with the press. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't be there because I was in the middle of rehearsing this opera in Vienna.
Yeah, well, we forgive you. But it was. I enjoyed the film quite a bit.
I spent a lot of time in Austin. I love Austin as well.
Yeah, great city.
And I know all the cast, and Tracy Letts, who wrote Killer Joe, was there.
Well, that was an interesting situation because that was a long-running play that I know that was something he had been wanting for years to finally make happen as a movie. And then when it finally did come out, I think everybody just kind of knocked it out of the park. It's wonderful performances by everyone. It seems like it's a very powerful film. Sure, there's controversy behind it, but it is.
Why?
Well, because of the chicken scene.
What is the chicken scene? Could you describe
it? Do you want to
it?
Spoil the chicken scene?
No, you can describe it in detail. I'm okay with that.
Fellatio on a piece of chicken. That's
right.
Pretty much the description of the scene.
You got that, folks?
Spoiler alert.
He said it. I didn't.
Spoiler alert.
Okay.
But
you have never practiced that.
I've never personally practiced that. No.
I mean, it could be done with a hot dog.
It probably could be done with a hot dog.
Yeah.
You're killing me. Anyway, the one thing I remember Matthew and Gina and Emil and everybody telling me was that they said that you mostly just do one take when you're shooting, or when you were shooting that film, you were just doing one take. And I would imagine that really makes sure that the actors are on their game, to get it right. So they can rehearse as much as they want, but when it's time to do it, if you want to do an extra take, fine, but it's going to be that one take. Now, was that, what is the thought process behind that from your perspective?
How many takes of this interview do you want to do?
I don't know. It's been pretty fun.
I mean, there's only going to be one take of this.
Right, exactly.
What you ask and what I answer. We don't go back and shoot the questions again or the answers again to clean them up. Mm-hmm. What I'm interested in is the same thing that you're interested in when you do an interview: spontaneity.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in perfection unless the dialogue is Shakespeare, which is an iambic pentameter, and it's blank verse. And the words have to be absolutely correct or you're going to mess up the meaning. When I'm doing a film on a contemporary subject, I'm interested in spontaneity. Now, by take 6 or 16, you can get it all perfect. Word perfect, but it isn't in the moment anymore. So I'm interested in when the actors step before the cameras that it's word perfect, but they know what they're supposed to be doing, they know what they're supposed to be saying, and we don't do it again hoping for a miracle on take 6 or take 82. And I know there are directors that shoot 100 takes. There have been such directors recently. And I'm not criticizing their work, but I just don't see working. I would fall asleep behind the camera if somebody was doing more than 2 takes. I would do another take, for example, if the camera fell over, or if a light fell down into the shot.
I don't know if you could recapture that hot dog story in the same way.
Well, I would try, but the point is there's no reason
right.
in doing a contemporary piece, if the actors are cast well, why they shouldn't just go out and do it. But because of film technique that's developed over the years, most actors think of a take as a rehearsal. It's like a rehearsal. Take 1 is just, I'll figure out what I'm going to do on take 2. And by take 6, I'll have a better idea, but 10 takes later, I'll really know what I'm doing. That's a waste of time and a waste of money, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Especially when you want spontaneity. I don't know, as I'm talking to you, what the next word out of my mouth is going to be. We're just talking. I'm just answering your questions. I have no idea what I'm going to say. I haven't memorized this. I didn't know what you were going to ask me. And so that's how I want a scene to play when I'm making a film, spontaneously.
Yeah. All right, so last thing, and we'll wrap this up and go get a hot dog.
Okay. You mean you don't have any on?
I don't have any hot dogs.
Do you have
here.
any mustard on you, though?
I might, actually.
On your shirt,
On my
possibly.
shirt, maybe somewhere.
I know you love them, so that often happens.
Let's talk about your book, because you've got a book coming out, kind of an interesting sort of tell-all type of book. Tell people.
I don't tell all.
You don't tell all, but you tell most.
I'm not going to tell all to a bunch of total strangers. Would you?
No, I wouldn't. And you're actually going from here to a book signing, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I don't think so.
Or is it?
It's Saturday.
Oh, it's Saturday. Okay, so
Today's Friday, Mark.
Yes, I know. It's been
And you're
long,
Mark, not Mike. And today's
festival.
Friday, not Saturday.
It's been a long festival.
Will somebody let him know? No. Yeah, the book is called The Friedkin Connection. And it took me 3 years to write. I wrote it in longhand, in moleskin books. And I did it, well, I won't say by accident, but I had no intention of writing a memoir. I got a call out of the blue from an agent in New York who's a book agent. He has a company called Inkwell Management. I'd never heard of it or him. And he got my phone number from a mutual friend of his and my wife. And he called me out of the blue, and he said, would you be interested in writing a memoir? And I said, no. He said, well, why not? And I said, because I wouldn't be interested in reading it. And he said, well, what if I told you that I had 5 major publishers interested in publishing it if you'd write it? I said, well, that would get my attention. He said, well, come into New York, meet these guys, spend 3 days here, meet them, listen to what they have to say, and if you want to do it, we can talk about it and work out something. So I did that, and I met with the heads of 5 publishing companies, and the guy who was the head of HarperCollins was a guy called a man called Jonathan Burnham, and he really gave me the key how to do it. I said, I wouldn't even know how to do this or how to go about it. I never kept diaries. I live in the present. I don't unless I'm asked a specific question, I don't recall what happened. And then if someone tweaks my memory, yes, I can remember things. But I said, I didn't catch, well, how would I go about this? And he said, don't write a book where you just say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Write how you felt about everything that you considered important that happened to you. And that was the key that opened the lock for me. It was about feelings more than events, about how I felt about those events. And so I just started to write. I went with HarperCollins and I just started to write. And I didn't even do it in sequence. I would sit down and think about some aspect of my life that came to me. Could have been 50 years ago or a week ago. And I would start to write about that until I was written out. Then I'd get a thought about something else and write about that. And I wrote piecemeal for 3 years until I was able to get enough and figure out how to tie it all together as a book, which comes out on April 16th and is called The Friedkin Connection.
I can't wait to read it.
You can wait.
I can wait a little bit.
You have to wait.
I have to wait.
Today is only Friday. It's not even
days.
Saturday. And it's only the 12th, Mark.
I can think of nobody more perfect to receive the Star Award. I'm so glad you came to the Dallas International Film Festival, and this has been one of the great pleasures of my career.
I'm happy to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
What's the Star Award, by the way? Can you explain it to me? Seriously.
Every year, the Dallas International Film Festival chooses a person, usually a behind-the-scenes, a person like yourself, someone who directs films or writes films, and we bestow them with the Star Award. And so you
Why
are,
me?
because you're a legend. What are you kidding me?
Not if I go to that hot dog joint.
If you go to that hot dog, you're just Bill, the guy that wants a hot dog.
I have to pay for it.
You probably do have to pay for it.
I can't say, by the way, I'm a legend.
You can show them the Star Award, and maybe they would give you the hot dog.
I doubt it.
Probably
I don't think I could get on a bus anywhere in the world as a legend. By the way, I'd like to go from here to New Orleans in this cab. I'm a legend. Can you take me there? No, I mean, I don't know who's a legend, Mark. I've met people who are very talented in my life. I've been fortunate. Some of whom are known to the public. But most of them are good at what they do. And so they continue to do it.
Well, let me just say this. As a guy who loves movies and loves films, there are certain people in this business that I admire, and you are among those people. And
I appreciate that.
That's why I appreciate you being here and appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate that as well. What are you going to call them now that they're no longer movies or films? Maybe movies is more accurate now.
Movies is more accurate,
than films, because they aren't films. Even though films are being run still on 35 millimeter and even 16 millimeter projectors, there aren't going to be any more made. Film is unfortunately a lost technique. Yeah. It's all digital now. It lives in the digital world, and I don't know that the techniques will have changed that much, but I do want to say this, if you still have some space there, to like young people out there, although there probably aren't any, right? I mean, if they're young people, they're out doing something, right? They're not.
You never know.
Watching an endearing legend sit here talking to you, Mark. But
I'm picking up the sarcasm.
No, but it's easy. No, it's the truth. But it's easier for young people who want to get into this business today than it ever was.
Yeah, there's so many more opportunities. Yeah.
Like film festivals and critics who have kept alive the legacy of film and world cinema. And also because a young person can do what I was never able to do at a younger age. And that's go out and buy a little camera and shoot something and get it shown. You can now make a little movie of any length, and you can post it on YouTube or one of the many other sites or blogs and get people to see it. And people will see it. And sometimes someone will see it who thinks that whoever made this is talented. And many people have gone out and gotten jobs in the industry this way. Now, that didn't exist when I started in the business. So I think it's a massive leap forward that because of the portability of cameras and sound equipment and the ease with which someone can now put their ideas in a visual medium, it's a great time for young people or even older people who want to go into movies.
Yeah, sky's the limit. Thank you, Bill.
Pleasure,
I really appreciate
Mark.
it.
Good
It's
to
an honor.
talk to you.
Yeah, thank you.